This is a Fleet Success Show, dedicated to helping you and your fleet succeed using the experience of fleet professionals and Hall of Fame fleet legends. The show that explores how the pillars of stakeholder satisfaction, intentional culture, resource efficiency, and risk management all combine to lead your fleet to success. We're glad you're here. Now, let's get into the show.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Fleet Success Show. I'm Marc Canton, your host. I am the VP of Product and Consultant here at RTA Fleet, the Fleet Success Company, and I am joined by my buddy and new colleague, relatively speaking, Jake Johnson. Jake, how you doing?
I'm doing good, doing really well.
Good to have you here, my friend. You know, we had Connect back in October, so a few months ago, and you made, quite a few, I thought, really insightful comments on a number of topics. And one of the things I kind of wanted to maybe bring you in to talk about today was, outsourcing and sublet work, because you have a unique experience in that in particular industries. But before we do that, give folks some, kind of the flyby overview. Tell us, a little bit about how you got into fleet and your fleet career here.
Started in the driveway with Dad, right? That's how we all kind of fall into this. So, tinkering with cars and helping Dad in the driveway, just kind of sparked interest and put this passion in me. So as soon as I was legally allowed to work on equipment, I went and applied and I joined a international truck dealership. Spent several years there, got my master certification, and from there I wanted to try out the fleet business, so I moved over to another company, grew my way from turning wrenches to running the shop to service manager, and had a lot of fun doing that, and then wanted to see what that particular company did some leasing and some rentals, and I wanted to see what fleet alone was all about. So I went over to standalone fleet, and it was amazing. So yeah, about 20 years in all, and love every one of them.
Dude, you're old school, man. We don't see as many of the guys who worked their way up from wrenching, all the way through. And I think that's cool because it gives you an insight, a technical background. What some of the old fogies, some, not all. I mean, we've got some of the great ones here. Lack is that sort of that quantitative piece, that sort of aversion to tech, which, generally speaking, the younger generations are the other side of that, but then they don't have the technical skills, right? They don't really, I got a quick little funny story I've told maybe once or twice before, but when I was a fleet management consultant on my very first study, I'm sitting down with the fleet manager, never turned a wrench in his life. And as I'm talking to him, a mechanic walks by. He says, "Hey, you called for me?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "I need to know what's going on with that Camry. Executive so-and-so is really pushing me on it. I need it out the door today." "Man, we're not going to be able to get it out the door." "Why not?" "Well, we're still waiting on the air brakes to come in." And then, the mechanic walks away and I can hear him giggling, and he goes, "Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah." And the fleet manager was serious. He really believed that this Camry was waiting on air brakes, right? So just tell that story to kind of illustrate kind of the challenges, if there's such a diverse set of skills, it's really hard to master them all unless you've done them all, and you've done them all. And that to me is super cool.
Yeah.
And I love that part of it because you're a quantitative guy too. You're a big data guy.
I like both sides of it. And I think that's what really turned me on to where I'm at now is, I love the hands-on. I like to go out and get dirty and have fun with the guys in the shop. I can relate to that. But I also could sit behind the computer and do some analytics with some reporting and things to understand where things are going awry. And I think that's kind of what drove me to where I'm at.
And so for folks listening, just getting to know you, most of your career has been in the trucking industry. Is that fair? Like in logistics, what kind of fleets have you managed, generally speaking?
Yeah. So all of it's trucking. Like I said, I started at an international dealer. I went to a commercial truck fleet that also did lease and rental. So we did contracted leases where we would work on contract customers and rental equipment as well. And then I went to a local grocer where we did trucking and refrigerated grocery.
So closed route.
So yeah, it's all been trucking.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah. Yep. Closed route.
Okay. So inevitably, obviously, you're working in places that have, generally speaking, their own in-house shops. But
all of it. Yeah.
I'm sure that like there's a portion of that work, predominantly specialty work, that you guys were outsourcing. Is that a fair assumption?
You could try to do 100% in-house, and I do. We manage fleets today that can do that. But I think it's pretty fair to say that most fleets are going to have some degree of outsourcing, and we did our fair share.
Yeah, yeah. So like, so let's talk with, the audience. Maybe they're kind of new to fleet and they're trying to figure it out. I mean, obviously there's some fleets out there that are purely outsourced, right? But let's talk to that person who's got the in-house shop or shops, and whether it's because they're going through a technician shortage or they're trying to optimize. What are some things you look for? How do you decide what should be outsourced, what shouldn't be outsourced? Let's start there. What are some pointers you might give to someone to try to figure that out?
One of the things that determined what I would send out, in my experience, is technician training. Do we have the training to tackle this task? Do we have the tooling to tackle this task? Those two immediately. I mean, if either one of those are no, it probably needs to go out. The other thing is, like you mentioned, labor shortage. How long do I want this piece of equipment to be down? Can the vendor do it quicker? It may not be cheaper, but can they do it quicker? Which, what's the value? What am I trying to accomplish? Does it make sense for this to go out? So those are kind of some of the basic questions that I would ask myself to determine on sending equipment
out. So that's
out.
good, because there's a mix there. Some of that strategy and some of it is like, in the moment decision making, right? Which is cool. So yeah, obviously, like you mentioned, the one that's off the top of my head is, if I don't got trained techs for it, that's a big one. You mentioned tooling, and I want to come back to tooling for a second. Because tooling is interesting for me, because if you just don't have that tool and it's in a one-off thing, well, then clearly you need to send it out, right? But then there's the question of, well, should I have the tooling, right? And that's where it gets a little bit tricky. Like, I've seen fleets spend, a lot of money on, let's say, alignment machines, and it's like, really? There's an alignment specialist down the block. Why did you do that?
Yeah. How often do you? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's a good point. Yeah, if alignment machines, they're not cheap. We know, the setup, everything that goes into it. If you're not doing them every day, especially on fleet, I mean, resale shops make sense, right? They're able to capture the ROI for that piece of equipment. Now, fleet shop, maybe a different story. However, to your point, if we're doing repetitive jobs and the tools, $100-$200, are we going to send this out rather than grabbing the tool to where we, can do it in house? That's a great point.
So if it boils down to something we talk a lot about on the show, which is cost analysis, right? Kind of figure. But how will someone get there? How do you get to kind of figuring that out? I guess is part of where my mind goes to. And I don't know about you. I mean, again, you lived this more than I did. But my mind goes straight to VMRS codes. I'm pulling my work. Like, if I'm trying to think about planning for next year, I'm grabbing my VMRS codes and I'm looking at, this is how much work we did in each one of these categories. This is how much money we spent, hours we spent, including the outsource and the in-house. And I don't know about you, but that tells me a lot. I mean, it's so underutilized. People use it purely to track and enter. But I mean, there's all sorts of things you can learn from that, no?
That's exactly how, in my mind, that's the only way to do it.
Okay.
So, I mean, what do I need to focus on? We talked about technician training. How do you know what to
Bingo.
focus on?
Right.
Let's pull the VMRS, see where we're spending our time. Okay, let's get them trained in that area. Same with tooling. If we're spending a lot of time on a certain area, maybe it's disc brakes, air disc brakes at that. Maybe we need some tooling around that. Yeah, pulling your work history by VMRS to understand what we need to focus on in the coming years. Maybe, EV is a big topic. Maybe it's, around batteries. Maybe we need to send folks to understand high charge or low charge, or, maybe there's training that needs to be done around that. And it's all driven off of VMRS.
Right. And see, here's the part that I love is the inverse of it. And this is what I so rarely see people do, but I encourage folks to consider it. That same data is also, if you do choose to outsource it, well, now you know exactly how much of it you're going to outsource, and you need to outsource, right? And that's powerful information, right? Now you can go to the negotiating table with, this is how much business I'm talking here, man. This is how many jobs this is going to be. What's that going to cost me? You can price it, you can quote it, how frequently it's happening, et cetera, et cetera. And so it goes both ways. It tells you what you need to train, what tooling you need to buy, but it also tells you what kind of vendors I need, and how much of it exactly I'm doing. So that VMRS, man, coding your work, man, it's so important to code your work properly, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And I love that. I love that point you made because so one of the things we used to do is we would have supervisors, shop foremen come to us and say, "Hey, this needs to go out. It's a large job. We just can't get to it, whatever the case might be." And it's like, well, hold on a second. What do you think about sending out these lower costing jobs, get these off of our plate so we could do it in house? Because that large jobs being sent out is going to cost us twice as much sending it out as it would to send these lower paid jobs off and get those completed and tackle this one in house to save money. So yeah, there's many ways to cut that up and look
Great
at it.
call. Yeah, that's a great, and obviously all of this. One of the things that's been implicit in almost every comment you've made, which I love, is you're always thinking about downtime. You're always thinking about keeping that truck available. What is the fastest way? Cost and speed, right? What is the fastest way to get that truck back up, and what's it going to cost us?
Exactly.
So that should always be part of this calculus somewhere, right? And going back to that alignment, that's why it may not make sense for the average fleet to go out and buy an alignment machine and get an alignment specialist, just because of the pace. It's hard to meet that economy of scale that alignment shop, that's all they do, balance tires and alignments and that sort of a thing. And so you see that, like, what are some common things you see as what, so first of all, let me take a step back. Like, I do think each fleet has its own set of circumstances, right? You mentioned the skills and the tool, but geography. Like, I remember the first time I did a gig with a shop in Alaska, and I was like, well, tell me, just asking, going down my list, such a smart guy. This is why people laugh at consultants. Hey, yeah. So tell me what kind of work you outsource. And they did one of these and they're like, do you have any effing clue where we are, man?
Yeah.
Who are we outsourcing
to?
Right?
Yeah. There's no one that's going to help me here. I'm by myself. I'm on this ship alone.
Right, exactly. Whereas, when I ran my fleet in the heart of New York City, we outsourced everything. It really didn't make sense. I could leverage different shops against each other. I had so many shops within 5 minutes of me that it didn't make sense, to take up the value of the real estate was too important, that it literally didn't make sense to have a shop. So each fleet is going to have its own set of circumstances. So let me start by kind of acknowledging that. With that in mind, sort of what are some general or rule of thumbs? What are the kinds of jobs that, in your experience, are ones that if someone's doing it in-house, you might say to that fleet manager, all right, maybe take a peek at that one. That might be one that you want to explore a little further to go ahead and outsource, that you see maybe folks doing in-house that maybe they should be thinking about outsourcing. And then after you answer that, answer the reverse. Like, what are some things that you see maybe people, and may not exist any, but, is there anything that people kind of tend to outsource that maybe they shouldn't, in your opinion?
I'm going to revert back because kind of the comment I made earlier, like we're going to look at right now in this situation today, what makes sense, because today might not make sense tomorrow. It just depends on what's on our plate. So that's going to be number one. Like you said, speed and cost is going to be the first thing I look at. The things that really make sense to send out are specialty items. I mean, we're a maintenance shop. We should be able to maintain our equipment. If we're not doing that, we probably need to look at the training, right? So I'm gonna say specialty, like the alignments. I'm not gonna buy a alignment machine in a fleet shop because I have no ROI on that besides the little bit I get from tire wear and et cetera. So the alignments are gonna be sent out. Transmission repairs. I'm not gonna have a trained technician necessarily on transmission repairs because we just don't see them often enough. So if I'm not seeing it repetitively all the time, I'm not going to spend the time and tooling to train and have that ability to do it in house. So just kind of specialty items really is what's probably going to go out the door for the most part. And then again, always reverting back to that time and cost. If it's time sensitive and the shop's just not got the ability, let's get it to someone that can. And I love the comment you made about having so many vendors that you can kind of pin them against each other. Obviously, we could drive the cost down when we could do that. So,
Because no one goes to school for fleet management, chances are you were never formally trained on how to successfully lead a fleet. That's where the Fleet Success Playbook comes in. The Fleet Success Playbook is your guide to building a safe, reliable, and efficient fleet that provides exceptional service. Learn all about the 4 pillars of fleet success: stakeholder satisfaction, intentional culture, resource efficiency, and risk management. Get nearly 100 years of combined advice on common challenges, practical solutions, actionable tips, and real examples from fleet industry experts who have been there and done that. Visit www.fleetsuccessplaybook.com to request your free copy today.
Yeah, cost, service, right? Who can pick up and drop off for me instead of making me having to go run it? Yeah, that's a good call. Let me ask you a couple of ones that I've seen along my career that always kind of make me scratch my head, right? Like, I have very rarely seen, but I've come across occasion where I've seen people with in-house body shops, and they weren't in Alaska. Let's just say it that way. What do you think about that? I'm not sure. I'm permanently developing an opinion around that one. It's specialty to me because you're not doing accident repair all the time, and yet, hey, maybe if you got a really aggressive law enforcement department, maybe you are doing accident.
yeah.
What are your thoughts there?
I'm on the line
Okay.
here, and you might you said you're forming an opinion, so let's see if this drives you one way or another. So body work, panel replacement or repair is one side of body work, right? And then you got this liability side, which is a paint booth with exhaust and ventilation. So how much are you doing? Can you justify the cost of that setup? If you can justify the cost of the setup of the ventilation and exhaust systems needed for a booth, I think you should absolutely do it in-house. You're going to absolutely save money in the long run. If you can't justify the cost behind that because you're not doing quite enough of it, then I'm probably going to lean toward outsource.
Okay, but we talk about the 4 pillars, right? One of the pillars is risk management, right? And I know not every fleet manager out there is also the risk manager, but they work with their risk management departments, right? And so to your point about if you're doing enough of it, it's like, if you're doing enough of it, and this is why I struggle with this one, right? If you're doing enough of it, don't you have another problem that you need to solve first so that you're not doing enough of it? You see where I'm going here?
Yeah, I do. We called that job security where I'm from, but we love our drivers.
Amen, brother. All right. I won't get us in too much more trouble on that one. Here's another one. Okay, this is one that's probably a little more, let's say, widespread. Is upfitting. I'm surprised today. I mean, back in the day, I got you did a ton of upfitting in house, and I also think there's a job security element to why so much upfitting is done. Right? There's not enough work to do. That sort of thing. But that's one that, with today's specialty, there's so many specialty outfitters out there, and more of them are certified by the OEM. I mean, if I would want an OEM certified upfitter, I want to move the liability piece that over to them, right? I don't want my OEM bitching to me, excuse the French, about that's not under warranty anymore because somebody touched something. Is another element. I mean, and also this is what these folks do. You may think, oh, putting on a light bar is nothing, and it is nothing. But these folks spend all day, every day putting on light bars, and wiring and fishing wires through here. They're the pros at it. Let them do it the same way you're the pro at fleet,
The other side of that is the fact that they do spend all day doing that. They know the little niches. They understand, hey, I can't run this wire through this channel. I have to run it this way. Or we've had issues with rubs at this spot. Or, if we mount it here, the vibration, it comes loose and flies off. And then we got a whole nother liability. So a big one on the trucking side is deer guards or brush guards, the if they're not mounted properly, torqued properly, and you have something come off, that's a potential liability, and frankly, someone's getting hurt if that comes off on the highway. So yeah, to your point, yeah, to have a certified third party that can take that liability off of doing it in house, that's a huge factor these days.
Yeah, that's the one that's got me scratching my head. I think there's probably a little bit more upfitting going on in most fleets. Not every fleet, but in most fleet, there's more of it going on than should be. If you just kind of took the industry as a whole, I think more of that should be getting outsourced. Some of the radio stuff I understand if there's law enforcement involved and all that jazz.
Sure.
The area where you do see it is safe emergency vehicle inspections. I mean, that's almost entirely outsourced. And again, that's a risk management decision at this point.
Absolutely.
So you kind of see that. All right. I want to kind of, we're staying on outsourcing here, but I want to kind of like turn the page and talk about a different piece of it. So now you've figured out what you need to outsource. You know what it is, at least strategically for the year. As you point out, you still need to make a tactical decision each and every time. Right? We're with you. You should give yourself some parameters around how you're going to make that tactical decision. You mentioned some of them. The basics are cost and time and availability. But you also have this strategic plan, right? Okay, yeah, these are the ones that I already know. As soon as they walk through the door, I'm sending my alignment out. So now you got to go do that, right? You got to go kind of figure out, how am I going to make this work? What are some best practices or some good practices and things that have worked well for you as far as, creating a good and solid and strong outsourcing program for whatever it is you're going to sublet?
First and foremost, and I'm a huge believer, and we've not talked about this, so I'm not sure where your mind is here, but vendor relationships. I'm a firm believer in having a solid relationship with your vendors, and at that point, outsourcing should be very simple. You're going to have good communication around that, and there's a lot more that falls in line there. Having the vendor relationship is key for the beginning of what I'm outsourcing. Outside of that, how are you tracking it? From start to, once we make that decision that it's leaving my location, I got to have a way to understand from cradle to grave, how am I tracking that?
Exactly.
Let's get a work order. We should already have a work order created. We should be making documentation on that work order, understanding, okay, this is the decision made and why. We should have a status update of whether it's waiting to go to vendor, at the vendor, waiting on estimates, whatever that is. We want to make sure we're tracking that. Without a doubt, if someone's never even heard of the asset we're discussing, they should be able to punch that into your FMIS system and understand exactly where it is and how it got there, all the way through the process.
Right. Yeah. So kind of steelman in that back to you. You got to use your FMIS because that's what you're saying. You got to track it. You should have your statuses set up so that you can follow along essentially with whether it's your work order status or your asset status, or really it's both. It's out to the dealers, maybe your asset or out of service, and then your work order status. You want to key in all that. I think one of the things most people do, I think I mentioned it at the top, is, they see outsourced work as just outsourced work, and they just they have like a generic work code for outsource, and they're not tracking the data about the nature of that work that's going. I think the effort of putting in the labor and the parts is worth it in the long run.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then that's how you can also later on fast forward, and now you're evaluating, am I getting good deals? Am I getting, you're going to want to look at that data. And then I would argue, Bud, that you want to treat your vendor almost like you treat your tech. How many comebacks am I having? What's my turn time? Am I getting this thing, am I getting 80% of this back within, 24 hours and 90% within 40, the same way you would treat a tech, right? If you're getting a lot of comebacks, if you're getting a lot of, what's going on there? People fixate on, did I get the best price for labor and parts? And I'm not saying that's not true. It's true. It's just, so what if you're having to bring it back 4 times?
Well, and I used to say it all the time. I pay for great service.
Right.
I can get treated poorly anywhere.
Right.
I pay for great service, right? So
exactly. Exactly. So what are things people can do? Like you mentioned vendor relationship, right? And that doesn't happen overnight. And if you get the great service, it's going to lend itself to a great relationship. And what do you say to someone who's new or worse? Like I can't tell you how many times I've seen a fleet and it's like, well, who do you use? Well, we use this vendor. Why? Because we've always used that vendor. Or because they're down the block. And you might have a great relationship with them and they may still not be best for you. So that's kind of difficult to navigate. You got to be careful of that. I mean, before we even get down the path of fraud and all that, because that's a reality that maybe we can talk about another day. But in the end, you got to treat your vendor like your employee almost and hold them to the same standards, right? Essentially. Is that fair?
Yep.
Yeah. I think one of the best ways to do that is if you have enough volume of that. We're going back to that VMRS and understanding your volume. Now, you're not going to have enough volume on everything you do. But on those heavy volume ones, man, I would suggest going out to bid.
Yeah, go out to bid. Definitely, like you mentioned before, having several folks that you can go to.
Very good call. Good call. Right? Yes.
Yeah, not just hey, this guy's convenient or he's down the road, or no, let's talk to several folks and really get to understand. Same way we bid equipment or anything else, it's no different. So go out, figure out who can do what for how much, and see if you can better that process while you're having those discussions. My biggest thing with any vendor that I've ever had relationship with is honesty. We may not tell each other what we want to hear at any point, but I'm going to give it to you straight so we know where we're at and you can get better.
And that's why I'm going to advocate. I know Steve Salzgiver is a big advocate for this. And I will tell you, it really helped me move the needle, years ago. Service level agreements. I think SLAs are important. Some people don't like them because they feel like it hurts. It's like, what do you call it? It's like a prenup, like,
yeah.
I've heard it compared to a prenup. Like, do you really want to sign a prenup before you get married? It feels like a bad omen, right? And, I'll leave the marriage piece out. But as far as an SLA, the answer is yes, you do. And the reason I think it's important is it may feel mean or distrusting, but actually what it is it creates clarity.
Yeah, it does. And here's the thing with the SLA or prenup in that case. You don't need it until you do.
Yeah, bingo.
Well right. Said. So if we're doing our job, if we're taking care of each other like we're supposed to, it'll never come up. So let's get an agreement here. And as long as you meet or exceed that, we'll never have to touch it.
That's a great point. That's a really great point. Yeah, I think it's important. I think it's fair, and it's fair both ways, by the way, because you can't expect great service from your vendor if you can't keep your commitments to your vendor. Especially the more dependent you are on in outsourcing, the more that the nature of the relationship becomes just about your performance as it does around theirs, right? But you got to be able to hold people's feet to the fire, and if you don't document it, you can't hold their feet to the fire. That's just the bottom line. And the minute you do that, like you said, usually that's all you need to not have to address it if it's a really great relationship and it's a great vendor. But it also gives you the framework by which you're going to measure their performance.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
So,
yeah, if we've got a agreement that 80% is going to be turned in 24 hours, and we're sitting around 50%. Hey, what's going on?
Personal.
Okay, yeah, it's not personal. Yeah, you've run into some labor shortages. I get it. What are we looking at? I mean, this is a partnership at this point. Or you got leads. You got to get back on track. Like we've got a fleet to run here. So yeah, and again, that's where the honesty comes in. We should be able to have those honest conversations without having escalated conversations.
Yeah, and it helps you to keep politics out. And I'll tell you what I mean. I've seen this on the corporate side with charities and things like that. I see this a lot in education and higher education. Well, why do we use Jim Bob's service shop on, University Lane? Well, Jim Bob's, he donates to this and he's been a member of that council and he's a real great friend of the university. Yeah, but the SLA said 80% and he's got 50%, like you said. Right? That helps you a lot to have those conversations,
Yeah.
And they can be challenging, and you don't want to be accusatory, and you don't want to be, but this is the area where things get dicey for a lot of fleet managers. And those SLAs, they really are a great tool to help keep it clean.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more.
All right, man. What else you got? Any other tips or tricks that you would put out into the world for our, especially maybe our folks newer to the industry, or folks who maybe feel like they got this, giant gorilla that they got to tackle when it comes to outsourcing? Any other thoughts that come to mind, tips or tricks for how help them manage that program better?
No, I mean, I'll just recap kind of what we've discussed, the decision making, whether it's going to be outsourced or not, specialty items, upfits, liability items from a company standpoint, liability. We don't want that liability on us, so we're going to want to get those outsourced. So once that decision's made, just really having a tool. Back in the day, I don't know if you can relate to this, but we used to be paper and pen. Paper would get lost. You wouldn't know where a piece of equipment was for a week until someone called and said, "Hey, I got an update." And it's like, man, I forgot that was even over there. So, then that gives you kind of time tracking on your downtime and stuff. So, get away from the pen and paper, the Excel sheets. Like, there's tools out there now, really good tools, whether it's us or someone else. There's FMIS out there that will give you the tracking ability, and just make sure you are tracking that cradle to grave. Again, the best way to look at it is if Mark was a new employee and he was asked, where is this piece of equipment at? You should be able to punch that thing in, see where it's at, and everything that got it there. So every status change, every update, progress update, estimates, approvals, all the way through the process until that invoice is received, that equipment's back. You just want to make sure you're really got a good tracking mechanism there.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of pieces we maybe didn't hit. And, I think this falls under the umbrella of treat them like your technicians, but you got to have a QA, QC process, I would argue. If you're not doing the running, then put on that work order 30 minutes for your own tech to give it a test drive, or someone who's got the appropriate skills. Like in your case, you would be qualified to do that test drive even if you weren't a mechanic on hand, right? And then I think the other one this one I do think you see commonly out there, but you probably want to establish in that SLA cost thresholds, I'm going to guess, right? Like, under this amount, just go do it because it's not worth the time to fight. And I trust you and I have that relationship. Over this amount, give me a call before you do it. And that's usually tied to some other number that you would, again, treat your in-house the same way. Hey, don't do that repair yet.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
I think that's probably the theme of it. SLAs. So VMRS codes, know what it is you need and want to outsource strategically. Always make a tactical decision. Don't just rely on, those are guidelines. Those aren't rules. Context over control, I think, was one of your points early on, right? Make a good decision for what the situation is right now. Right?
Absolutely.
SLAs are important, and measure them the same way you'd measure your techs. Expect the same kinds of KPIs, generally speaking. Turn around. Those are the big things I think I heard you say today. You think that's about right? We'll call it a show.
Yeah.
So with that, thank you, my friend. Really appreciate having you on here. It was absolute pleasure talking to you. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
Yeah, I did. I appreciate you having me jump on, and hope to do it again soon.
Jake is a super, super extraordinaire fleet success manager here at RTA. We love him. He's been awesome. And for any customer who's gotten to work with him, you know that already. So if you have any questions for us, for me, for Jake, please don't hesitate to email us at podcast@rtafleet.com, or if you have suggestions for the show or other topics you want to hit, or share some ideas that maybe you think we missed, by all means, reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. And with that, have a great day, everybody.
We hope you enjoyed the show. If you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others. Post about it on LinkedIn or leave a review. Want to learn more about our fleet management software, Fleet 360? Check us out at rtafleet.com. If you want to learn more about having your fleet evaluated by our consulting team, go to fleetconsulting.com.